book. This four-letter word calls up a distinct image in the minds of most of us. A book is a familiar object that might be described as a number of sheets of paper with writing or printing. The pages are fastened along one edge and usually bound between protective covers. Books can be found in libraries, bookstores, classrooms, and most homes. This video, however, is about artists' books. What are artists' books? What distinguishes them from everyday books? Are they handmade books? Are they books made by artists? Peter Verheyen gives one answer. He asserts that an artist's book is conceived from start to finish as an integrated unit. In other words, every element is important and relates to the theme or message of the book. The pages, their shape, size, texture, the style and material of the binding, the text, the images, all fused together to form a whole. Artists' books are creative ventures and stand alone as works of art. They may contain some or all of the elements of the conventional book, but these elements are open to the artist's imagination. Each book represents an idea the artist is trying to convey. The artist may use a particular form, such as a scroll or a special type of binding, such as Coptic binding. The paper used is important not only as a material used to display the text or printing, but also as another variable that conveys the original concept. The artist has a variety of elements to work with: color, texture, shape, content, size, structure, three-dimensional qualities, and methods of reproduction or illustration, to name just a few. How the elements are combined increases the variables. Perhaps the first rule in creating artist books is that there are no rules. However, information, experience, and guidelines may be helpful. While this may be true for all art forms, it seems especially true for artist books. The artist also considers how the viewer will interact with the book. How will the book open? How can the artist most effectively draw the viewer into the concept being expressed? In addition, the viewer brings to the experience a willingness to set aside preconceived ideas and to allow the artist to guide the journey. The fact that the viewer holds, touches, and manipulates a book adds a dimension not achieved by paintings or drawings. Exploring an artist's book is an intimate and personal experience, and the viewer is less likely to be influenced by the reactions of a crowd in a gallery. Where do the ideas for these books originate? Where does the artist find inspiration? Again, there are no rules, and probably no two artists get their ideas in the same manner. For some, inspiration may come from a quote, everyday experience. For others, it may be a desire to commemorate a significant event or to express an abstract concept. And of course, some books are just for fun. Once the artist formulates his idea, he deals with the questions. What is my message? Who is the audience? How will the elements of line, shape, color, texture, and form contrast, balance, and rhyme with each other? How will the viewer move into the book? What will be the center of interest for the book as a whole and for its individual parts? For the artist, the variables are never-ending. The possibilities are endless, only limited by the artist's imagination.
These are some of the tools available for basic bookbinding. Glue stick, which commended for small piece collages, bookbinding brush, a glue brush. Clips for holding pads together when you're sewing a book. These are good because they don't give strong impressions into the paper. An awl for punching holes. Japanese hole punch, and this is used on a particular piece of rubber so it doesn't hurt what's underneath. This would not be good for a cutting mat. Also the X-Acto knife, which is very important, a straight-edged ruler, and one preferably with a metal edge so that you can put the straight edge on the paper and make a nice clean cut. Sometimes if you're using a plastic ruler, you can cut into the ruler. So use a steel-edged ruler or a metal ruler. A pair of scissors.
The bone folder is used to flatten paper when folding.
A cutting mat. These particular mats come in different sizes, small or larger. They have grids on the back for measuring paper, and as well they're self-healing. Triangle, and that's for lining up paper so that you can get a good 90-degree cut on the paper. You just line it up at the top edge, and then you've got a nice cut going down the other side. There are different plies of thread. This happens to be 3-ply, and this is waxed. Waxed thread works better in binding. If you don't have waxed thread, then you can get beeswax and just run the thread through the wax, and that waxes the thread. Then there are a couple of different types of needles. This one is a large eyelet and usually a dull needle. A round arced needle for particular types of binding like Coptic binding. Pencil and a pencil sharpener, because you always want to work with really sharp leaded pencil, and a set of colored pencils. And that's it.
I'm to talk a little bit about materials, so I thought I would start with letting you know that anything can go in book arts. Some examples I've got from my collection include feathers, mirrors, sequins, computer-generated type on commercially produced paper. And then there are also boxes that have paste papers on them and book structures that are fun as well as functional. When you're making books and you're talking about the materials used, it's best, I think, to start from the inside, working toward the outside. So in the beginning there were papers, and the first kinds of papers are not really papers we know them today. They're called proto-papers. The first piece is papyrus, and those are leaves that are pounded cross-grained to each other. And another kind of very similar proto-paper is a matal, which is pounded bark and comes from Mexico. Both of those papers were used for centuries before we got into what we now consider paper, which are the Asian papers. There's not really any such thing as a rice paper. There's paper made from rice, but mostly when we're talking about rice papers, we're really talking about papers made in Japan or China and not what they come from, the plant they come from. So Asian papers can be handmade, or they can be beautifully made by machine. And these are used, they're very delicate, lightweight, and they're used usually in 2 layers because of their thinness. beautiful handmade papers. This one has a laid pattern so that when you hold it up to the light, you can see parallel lines to it. Or you can make your own handmade paper. And there's a variety here. Some are made out of cotton, some are made out of linen, and this one is made out of straw. First, there's a huge variety of commercial papers made by wonderful companies, either for art purposes or commercial papers made for the regular printing industry. Or there are decorative papers that are made in the vat, like this one is, with fibers flowing through it. This paper was marbled after the sheet of paper was made, so there's a decorative pattern on the surface. You can buy commercially already printed papers. The purpose of a book cover is to protect the contents. So some artists choose to use something like mat board. Some artists choose to use chipboard. Mat board tends to be softer than book board. Chipboard tends to be acidic. So if you want to increase the quality of your book, you would use real book board, which is denser, heavier, and more likely to serve the function for which it's intended. Now we're on the outside of the book. So there's a variety of book cloths that you can use. There are beautiful printed and textural materials you can buy. On the inside of your book, to attach the book to the case, artists will use a spine cloth like this, where you can just cut the amount you need off a roll, or you can use a cloth, a spine cloth that you buy by the yard and cut it down to suit your needs. For gluing, the two most common glues that are archival, PVA is polyvinyl acetate. It's an archival glue, meaning it will last a very long time, not necessarily reversible. And methylcellulose, which is a much milder glue, very reversible with water. Sometimes people will choose to use them in conjunction with each other. Methylcellulose extends the drying time of the PVA, increases the spreadability of the PVA, which sometimes tends to be sticky.
Paper grain. All manufactured papers and boards have grain. When forming paper, the grain is determined by the directions the fibers move and are aligned. It may be difficult to discern the grain in handmade papers. I've determined the grain of this paper using the bend test. I've gently folded paper in both directions. I can feel the resistance in each direction. I compare. Paper bends more easily with the grain. Folding the paper with the grain creates a smoother and less bumpy fold. This paper is folded with the grain. This paper is folded against the grain. Another test for grain is to tear the paper. I tear the paper in this direction and I get a fairly smooth tear. When I tear the same paper in the other direction, it creates a bumpy, uneven tear. Wet paper stretches more against the grain. When you glue two pieces of paper together, or when you glue board and paper together, the two grains should be parallel, so the stretching will be in the same direction. Acid in paper is another consideration when creating books. The acid content of paper can affect how long the paper lasts. Acids may be added to the pulp to break down fibers before the paper is formed. Papers which contain acid will yellow and crumble over time. The paper may become very brittle. Many papers today are acid-free, and that will be indicated on the package. There is no way to tell if a paper has acid by the look or feel of the paper. You can purchase a pH testing pen which tests the acid in the paper. This felt pen marks purple on the paper if it is acid-free. It marks yellow on the paper if the paper contains acid. Parts of a book. front cover, spine, tail, head, the foredge, back cover, the end papers, the text block, and the colophon.
Scrolls. This is one of the oldest book forms, dating back to before 2500 BC. It was popular in Japan and the Middle East. Originally, a scroll was made from pieces of papyrus, which were glued together. Today, it is usually made from a long strip of rolled paper. You may view just part of the scroll, or the entire scroll may be unrolled to illustrate one image. The format may be horizontal, or the scroll may hang vertically. It may be placed in a decorative box.
Materials include a dowel, a long strip of paper, decorative paper for the end, ribbon, piece of reinforced paper for the board. The dowel has been sanded and the ends may be decorated. Attaching the scroll to the dowel, place a thin line of glue along the top of the paper. Adhere the paper to the dowel. Apply a thin coating of glue to the paper. Adhere it to the dowel. This will cover the dowel with decorative paper. Glue the top of the scroll paper to the end of the decorative paper. Fold the second piece of decorative paper in half. Cut a slit for the ribbon. Insert the end of the ribbon through the paper and glue. Glue down the reinforcing board. Apply more glue. And fold the paper over. Apply a thin line of glue and adhere end of the decorative paper.
Folds and variations. Accordion. This structure is usually made, like a scroll, from a long strip of paper. It was first seen in primitive nations from the East. The difference between a scroll and an accordion binding is the folding. Extra space is left in between the pages where the paper will be folded. A heavier weight paper or board may be added as a cover. Images and text can be seen on both sides of the accordion. There are many variations, such as the width of the folds, the angle of the folds, and the shape of the original strip. Multiple pages can be viewed at one time, and text or images can flow from one page to the next. This is one of the simplest bindings, with numerous variations.
Accordion books. Peggy begins with a long strip of paper. The paper is folded in half, making the center crease first. A bone folder is used to flatten the fold. Always fold to the outside of the paper. This book will have 8 folded sections on one side of the paper and 8 more on the reverse. If you want a longer book, additional strips of paper may be attached. The covers for this book are made using mat board. Book board or paper may also be used. Peggy will cover the mat board with decorative paper. She cuts the paper, leaving about 1/4 inch extra on all sides. A Xyron machine is used to apply glue. This machine applies a thin coating of glue to one side of the paper. The sticky surface is protected by a wax paper. The wax paper is then peeled away and the mat board is pressed down to the sticky side of the decorative paper. PVA or glue stick may also be used to apply glue. Peggy is clipping away extra paper off the corners to facilitate folding. Sides and ends of the paper are then folded down. A bone folder is used to press down areas in the corners for a more exact fold. This is done for the front and back covers. A drawing line adhesive is applied to the perimeter of the sheet, and a few lines are applied to the center of the sheet. The folded accordion is then adhered to the cover. A ribbon is applied to the back cover so the book may be tied closed. Glue was applied to the back cover in the same method as the front cover. You may also make an accordion book without covering the mat board. A cover may also be made using a piece of paper.
Pocket book. This is also a variation of an accordion book, with the addition of a fold along the bottom edge of the accordion. This fold creates pockets. The pockets can hold memorabilia, cards, images, and additional sheets with text.
This is a pocket book. Its construction is the same manner as the accordion book, with the addition of a flap made by folding up the bottom edge. Items may be inserted into the pockets. This book also has a paper band which keeps it closed.
Tunnel book. This structure borrows the binding from the accordion book. It is an excellent format to show depth in a scene or include multiple layers. Each page is part of a scene, and accordion strips are used to separate the pages.
Tunnel books incorporate multiple layers of images. Resources may include drawings, photographs, or postcards. Choose images which have sections that can be cut away. The size and orientation of the images must be the same. Decide on the order of the images. Closer images will become the foreground. Take a strip of paper for the accordion folds. You will need 2 strips. The folded sections may be large or small. Position the accordion folds along the sides of the images. Book may have a front and back cover.
Single sheet fold. This structure uses just one sheet of paper, which is folded and slit along certain folds. The single sheet forms all the pages and the cover. It is a good method for letterpress or the computer, as all the text can be printed on one side of the paper. The other side of the paper is hidden, but can be unfolded to view more text or an image. There are many variations of this format, with different folding or cutting patterns.
Single sheet fold. This 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper is folded into 8 equal rectangles. The numbers have been added to clarify the pages and the cover positions. One cut is made along part of the center line. These are the fold lines. This square sheet of paper is folded into 16 equal squares. The cutting is done along a continuous line starting on the outside edge of the large rectangle, proceeding towards the center. The pages are folded like an accordion, starting at the outside edge of the large rectangle and proceeding towards the center. This rectangular sheet of paper is folded 3 times vertically and 3 times horizontally to create 16 equal rectangles. 4 connecting cuts are made. The front and back covers have been labeled to show their placement and orientation. The sheet is folded in an accordion manner. The result is a sculptural book with some folds occurring vertically and some folds occurring horizontally.
Blind fold book. This is an accordion binding with the addition of holes punched near the ends of the pleats. A cord is inserted through the holes, which allows the book to be pulled closed like a Venetian blind. The blind fold book may be done with 2 different alternating images. One image is on the up-facing pages. The other image is on the down-facing pages. Depending on the angle of view, one image can dominate.
This is a stiff board which will be folded in a uniform manner and will be pieced together to give 2 units, which will then receive illustrations and end boards, and finally will be concluded in the accordion book.
To begin with, you need to take your stiff paper that will stand on its own, and the normal way of folding without measuring is to balance your edges against each other and to fold so that you can receive an accurate measurement. So the first fold would be in two, the second fold would be back upon itself, and the third fold would yet be back upon itself one more time. The bone folder is used to give yourself a nice crisp edge, and of course you have to be very careful to make sure that the edges match. When you have successfully folded two sheets of stiff paper, they are assembled into one unit, which means that both sheets are then put together so that you have an accordion fold. At this point, it is important to produce uniform holes across the top. These can be measured by using a ruler, which will give you any measurement that you choose. In this case, it's a 1/2 inch, and a probe or a needle will then be used to mark so that you go all the way through and you have a uniform marking. And then the Japanese hole punch is used to then give you a uniform hole through which later you will produce some string. Then we move on to the illustration that you've selected. In this case, this is an 18th century illustration of ballooning, and each illustration that you're going to use in this book is then carefully cut into 1-inch segments. Now, if you've measured carefully, you will find that the 1-inch segments will then fit to the inside of your accordion book. And you can put these in any order that you desire. Just remember that not only are you doing it on one side, but you're doing it on the other side. And if you really want to make a very nice book, you'll reverse it and put illustrations on the reverse side. It is helpful if you number these on the back so that you don't have to go back time and time again trying to decide whether or not you have them in the correct order. Then finally, in order to produce a nice finish to this book, you are going to take 2 pieces of bookboard or strong cardboard, and you're going to cover them with book cloth, which is this material, and the book ends will be applied to the end of the accordion fold so that you have a nice finish. A nice finishing touch is to purchase some of the grommets, which are these little elements, and they get fit into the holes and hammered in, and that gives you a nice finish so that as you open your accordion fold, you have very nicely finished holes which have little grommets, and these holes will be finished on both sides. Thread, and you slide it through the grommets so that you have some way of controlling the spread. And usually what I do is I take a measurement off the end and tie a knot so that this won't fall out or be taken out of its position. The last things you want to do is put all of this together so that it forms some kind of interesting unit, and in this case it is a clamshell box. Fits in, closes, and that's your final product.
Flag book. This binding is an extension of the accordion fold. Additional flags or pieces are added on alternating sides of the folds. This creates a sculptural book.
Today we're going to demonstrate a form called the flag book, and we start with an accordion fold. Start with a piece of text weight paper, bone folder, match your edges one side to the other, press it down, and bone fold. Nice crisp. And continue going back and forth in halves and halves again until you get an accordion such as this. The next step is to cut your flags. These are called the flags, and you use a heavier cardstock weight for that. And we're going to do a 3-flag book. So you would take one of your flags. This is about an inch going in there. Take dry line adhesive, or you could use a glue stick. glue that inch, butt this up to the top, fold it in. Then you would take your bottom one, also an inch of glue, because that's the size of the pleats. Put that in. Now here's the part where it makes it a flag. The third and middle piece is going to go in the opposite direction. So still an inch glue, and you want to get it kind of nicely in between those two pieces. One of the flag pleats. And you would just continue in the same way with all of these top and bottom ones facing that way, all the middle ones facing that way, and then I would take my covers that I have pre-cut and I would glue down 1 inch on either side. And I would line that up front. And then you've got your book. Now here are examples of completed ones. Actually, this is the first one that I ever made. But sometimes it makes a nice flapping sound when you open it. And then you don't have to just do it with rectangular pieces. You can also do it with interesting, differently cut pieces in different colors, and then collage material onto it. So there's really no end to what the possibilities are. There's another form that I make, which is the flag book called the human flag book, where I actually take the 3 pieces, and in this case I have done 5 of them, and I have not done the last one, which would be this piece inserted here, the legs inserted here in the same way that it's going in the opposite direction, and the last head going there. And that's a human flag book.
Single sheet pages. Fan. This binding is usually done with long strips for the pages. It differs from other structures because it is bound on only one point, like a fan. Multiple pages can be seen at once. The most unusual characteristic is that the open book forms a circle.
This form is called the fan book, and it's called the fan book because it opens up and fans out your pages. And this is a fan book that I made in Dream Group, and so I've collaged onto them, and the whole thing can actually turn in a whole circle if you wanted, or just a fan. And it's very simple form. All you need are preferably some cardstock paper that I've cut all in the same size, but you could actually cut them in all different sizes if you wanted to. And just mark a little place where you make a little hole, depending on what kind of fastener you want. This is kind of a screw post plastic fastener that I used over here, and I made a big hole punch with that. But on this little piece of paper, I'm just making little holes with my hole punch. Could actually take a heavy punch that I have at home and punch through all the sheets of paper, but I'm just doing this one individually. Now I've got this little brad, they're called, and it's kind of like a paper fastener but smaller, and I just insert it through all of the holes. And then it's got these 2 little wings at the end, and you just separate them. And then you've got another fan book. And there it is.
Palm leaf book. This is an old binding technique. Originally, real palm leaves or pieces of bark were used as the pages. Wooden boards were used as covers. The leaves became brittle and broke over time. Now paper or thin boards are used to create individual pages. The shape of the pages is usually long and narrow. A hole is punched near the end of each page, and a cord is strung through the hole. Knots are usually tied in the cord, which allows the book to remain opened in a V position. Exposed stitch bindings. There are many other exposed stitch bindings, including chain stitch, long stitch, and buttonhole stitch. The stitching pattern for these structures runs the length of the spine. Edge sewn binding. Stab binding. The Oriental Orion is similar to a stab binding. It was originally done with folded sheet pages, but is now also done with single sheet pages. This is a binding technique with a decorative exposed stitch. The text block is bound together by drilling holes and inserting a twisted paper strip through the hole. The exposed strip is wrapped around itself to form a button and pressed down. This part of the binding is never seen. The hinged covers and the text block are joined together with a decorative stitch which runs down the spine. There are many stitching patterns. Beads or charms may be added to the stitching.
This stab binding. And the thing that is great about this book is that you can sew together single pages. So instead of having folded pages, you can just have a series of drawings or anything that you have, and it's just a single page. These are blank, but it's nice to be able to do that. You have to have it clipped so that everything stays together while you're trying to sew it. And there's also variations on this book, of course, but I'm going to do the more traditional 4-hole version. And I'm going to leave my little knot in the front. You can do it in the front or the back. You go down through one, and you wrap around the side. And then you just kind of go up and down and going around the side every time. And it leaves a little hole here, but don't worry, you'll get to it. Try not to sew your clip in. I'm using just a cotton thread for this, so that's why it's slipping a bit. You know, you could use I just think it's more lovely, and for this one you really don't need to have a waxed linen. But it does make the sewing a little more challenging. And then here at the end you just simply tie a knot again, square knot. Bingo, it's done. Clips off, and it's a nice book.
Signature bindings. Coptic binding. This is a sewn signature binding with an exposed spine. The stitching creates a beautiful horizontal pattern along the spine. When different color papers are used on the outside of the signatures, this also becomes a design element. Another advantage of this binding is that the pages lie flat when the book is open.
Called the multiple needle Coptic binding, and it's a beautiful, beautiful book, and it's more simple than it looks. It's got a really impressive looking spine. So let me get started, and then you'll see at the end. But you have a needle for every hole, every row of stitching that you do. So this one I have 4 holes in each signature, so we're going to have 4 needles. And you start with the first signature, and you put, I have 1 string, and you put a needle on each end of the string. You go from the inside out. And you try and get both threads about equal. Come on. This is the front cover. I mark everything so that I can keep it straight, because there's a lot of things, as you can see, to keep track of, so I give myself as much advantage as I can. So I take 1 needle, and I go from the outside in, which is sort of a mantra. You keep going through the whole book, outside in, outside in. I'm going from the outside of the cover to the inside. And the thread is going to land on the inside of these 2 pairs. And then I lock it from the outside to the inside. This is the only part of the book that's different. Once you get the cover on, you just repeat the stitch over and over again. That's the simplicity of it, even though it seems like it's a really complicated thing to do. It's really not. Okay, here's the first time you're going to see me do the lift and separate maneuver. So I lift the cover out of the way, separate the 2 so I can tell where I'm going, and wrap my thread around the previous stitch. Next one. Tension. That's something that you kind of learn through experience, but mostly on this book you want it as tight as you can get it without breaking the signatures. So you usually figure out how tight that is by ripping through one once. Okay, here's number 2. So I lay the next signature right in front, and this is the stitch. You go down in with your pair of needles, just straight down 1 hole. Then you cross your needles inside the signature and come out. Then this is the part where you get the chain. You lift and separate. You loop around. And then you have that little chain starting. And you do that row after row and signature after signature. You've come out the last signature. And now it's time to add the back cover. From the outside in, lock the stitch. Again from the outside in. Handy to lift and separate again. Again, as tight as you can get it without ripping anything. Then you go up two from the outside in, make the little chain, go back in. I've got a lot of things in there already. There we go. And you do that for the last 3 rows, and your book is done. And as you can see, it's a pretty lovely little stitch you have going on here. The multiple needle Coptic.
Pamphlet stitch. This is the most basic stitch for joining 2 or more sheets. It uses a running stitch along the fold of the pages. And the knot may be on the inside or the outside of the fold.
I'm going to show today is the pamphlet stitch. I love the pamphlet stitch. It's really versatile. You can use it in other book forms, and it's just a handy way to put together a few pages if you wanted to make a chapbook for poetry or just a handout to give at a lecture or workshop you're doing. So the first thing you have to do is you just have to make 3 holes. The first one being exactly in the middle, and then 1 on either end, you know, of course, right at the same place on both ends. So I have an awl. Here we go. I'm going in. You just pierce the 3 holes. A lot of people use a special tool for this called a piercing cradle, but I don't have one. So I usually keep a box of Band-Aids handy whenever I'm sewing a book. Now, it's a very simple stitch. You just go from the outside in through the center hole. Leaving a little tail. You go out one of the top holes, in the bottom hole, and back out through the middle. Scissors. Tie a little knot. And of course you can embellish this with beads or other doodads to make it even more beautiful, but you tie a little square knot there, and there it is, a pamphlet.
Concertina. This is a combination of an accordion fold and a pamphlet stitch. Small signatures can be attached to the accordion strip in either the mountain or the valley of the fold. This binding works well if you add images or collage on the pages because the spine is expandable. The length of the open spine can be limited by incorporating a strap.
A concertina book is formed by folding narrow zigzag folds to create the spine. It can have a soft cover, a continuation of the spine, or hard covers. The weight and texture of the paper is a consideration. To help hold up the book, usually a stiffer, heavier paper is needed, but one that is not too heavily textured so as to make crisp folds. The spine of a concertina book is expandable and therefore can be displayed in several formats. For example, a star shape, or stretched out long. When the book lies flat, it opens flat. My spine folds on this are 1.25 inches wide. When folding, be sure to match the corners and bone fold well for an even spine. Well, this is the spine. You can see that concertina zigzag shape. First, I'm going to sew this signature inside to the mountain fold. And I've already got the 3 holes in here for the pamphlet stitch. Once I've got that, marking on the fold, and then another few holes here. The pamphlet stitch. Leave the tails on the inside. Just tie a knot and hide them inside the book. Going in the bottom there, and then cross all the way to the top, on the side of that spine. That's off a little shorter. And bone fold it again so that it stands up there. And then you would put these and the other butterflies in. Concertina book.
Case bound. This binding technique resembles the books we see every day, although many of those books are actually only glued. This binding uses multiple signatures that are sewn together and then glued into a case. The case includes a front and back cover and a spine. End papers hide the transition from the covers to the text block.
The cased-in book, which is the name for a traditional hardbound book with a stiff spine, requires more procedures and more time than many book forms. The component parts are the text block and the hard cover, which protects the text block inside. The text block is made of papers cut to the appropriate size. They are folded in half and creased. This forms a folio and contains 4 pages of the book. Several folios are nested together to form a signature. Any number of signatures make up the pages of a book, and together they are called the text block. End papers which go between the cover and text block are cut and folded like the folios and placed at the front and back of the text block. A final paper called the paste down will be used to finish the inside of the front and back covers. It is cut slightly wider than a single page. One end is then attached to the end paper with glue. Eventually, the paste down will be glued inside the cover. The signatures are now ready to be joined together. Before the signatures can be sewn together, holes must be punched along the folded edge of each signature. A cradle is used to hold the papers while they are perforated with a hole punch. A jig is used as a guide to ensure that the holes fall in the same place in each signature. The end papers, with paste downs attached, are handled like the signatures. Sewing is done with waxed linen thread and a needle. It moves inside and outside the holes along the spine of each signature. Stitching will move from head to tail in one signature. The next signature is then added and the sewing reverses, going from tail to head and so on until all are attached. Tapes are caught under the stitches on the outside of the signatures. They will stabilize and strengthen the text block in the covers when the book is finished. After sewing, the text block is wrapped in wax paper for protection. The spine of the text block is now ready for gluing. It will be treated 2 or 3 times, working the glue well between the signatures and into the sewing threads with brush and bone folder. When the final coat of glue is added, a piece of mull is attached to the spine and glued down well. The mull, like the tapes, will help to stabilize the pages within the covers. Finally, headbands are added to the head and tail of the text block spine. Today, these are a decorative finish that honors an old custom of actually sewing the head and tail of the book together by hand. Covers are made of 3 pieces of bookboard, which serve as the book's front and back covers and its spine. The 3 boards are glued to a covering fabric called book cloth. The edges of the boards are covered by wrapping the book cloth to the inside and gluing it down neatly. The covers of the book cloth are first trimmed back in order to reduce bulk where the fabric overlaps. When both the covers and the text block are dry, the latter is placed within the covers. It is centered inside so the covers project evenly around the text block. The book is then laid face down so that the mull and tapes can be glued to the back cover. Wax paper serves to protect the papers below. The book is turned over, and this process is repeated on the front cover. The two paste-down pages at the front and back of the text block are now freed from protective wax paper. The book is placed face down again, so the paste down can be glued to the back cover. The book is turned over, and this process is repeated on the front cover. If needed, the paste down can be trimmed while it is still damp using a sharp X-Acto knife and a straight edge. The book is now placed under weights or in a press and allowed to dry completely.
Cases or boxes. Many books can fit into a box or case. The cases were originally made to protect the book, but now they may be just decorative. There are numerous styles, including wraparound case, clamshell, slipcase, and four-sided case.
You always start with the book. The dimensions of the box are based on the size of the book. The box can be covered with decorative paper or book cloth, or a combination of decorative paper and book cloth. The measurements for a box are very critical. I've put out the various pieces. This is the bottom of the case. This is the spine side, the foredge side, the inner lid and the lid, the tail, little section that goes up, and the flap that will come over. I've marked the paper so that I get everything in the right line, and I've had to allow for a space for the hinge, and part of that is based on the board thickness, the thickness of the book board that you use. Book board comes in different thicknesses. I would mark the appropriate areas and glue these pieces with just enough space in between the pieces for the thickness of the book board. This allows it to close properly. And be hinged correctly. And the pieces have been attached to the decorative paper, and this has been turned back. Same thing would happen here, and here, and here. After that's done, a decorative paper is glued in the hinge area of each section. The same would happen here with the flaps. And then black paper, or another colored decorative paper, glued to cover any of the book board that was remaining. finished box looks like this, and there's the book inside. And you can see the areas where the hinges, I've left the decorative paper to show, highlighted these other areas with black. And this is the outside. And on this particular one, I've also added a little clasp so that it stays closed.
Altered books. Altered books utilize a book that is already made. This can be a manufactured book or a handmade book. The book is then altered in some way. The most common altering techniques include folding, tearing, cutting, stitching, page decoration, printing and transfer techniques, calligraphy, collage, and painting.
Altering books by folding can create some very beautiful sculptural effects and can be a fun alternative to other forms of book altering. Although the techniques are simple, the results can be very striking, as shown here. The simplest fold to try is folding each page in half, like so. Folding so the outside edge touches the center of the book. Now you may choose to fold in either direction, the same direction for the whole book, or in opposite directions from the center. Now you can repeat this process through all the pages of the book, or you can choose another type of fold. That way you may produce a result like this. In another example, I'm using a fold that I refer to as the Christmas tree fold because of the end result, where it looks like this. In this example, I will be folding the page from the center of the spine all the way to the outside corner. So usually for the first few folds, it's helpful to use a straight edge of some sort to begin the first few folds, and then for the successive folds you can use the preceding page as a guide. This way you'll produce several folds of the same type. Repeat that process throughout the book. Now you'll notice how this page overlaps the other page, so you sometimes may require a second fold. I like to strengthen the support of the book by using a simple 45-degree angle fold from the center to the outside edge of the book. And to do this, of course, I will unfold the first fold and then, using the crease that I've already made, fold it a second time using my bone folder to get a nice sharp edge. This result looking very much like a festive Christmas tree. This can then be painted or decorated otherwise, and produces a very effective and striking sculptural effect.
Christine is showing rubber stamping techniques. First is soft pastels with embossing fluid. Ink up the image using the clear embossing ink pad. You can stamp directly onto a book or a journal page, or onto a loose paper that can be used as a collage element, which is what she's doing here. Using cotton squares or paper toweling or facial tissues, rub soft pastel sticks to pick up the color, and then rub it over the stamped image. The glycerin in the embossing ink will pick up and hold the pastel powders. This is using Pearl X metallic powders. You ink up the stamp with clear embossing ink and stamp onto black paper. You dip a small dry paintbrush into Pearl X dry pigment powder and tap the brush lightly to deposit the powder onto the embossed area. Using super russet, brilliant gold, and true blue here. Use a separate brush for each color and use the brushes to spread the powder and blend the colors. The glycerin in the embossing ink will grab onto the powders and hold them in the stamped areas. Brush off the excess with a large, soft, dry brush. The black background square has the same large leaf image stamped across all 4 corners in black pigment ink, and then was embossed with black embossing powder to continue the subtle and elegant tone-on-tone background. This is multicolor stamping, embossing powder, and pastel background toning. You ink up the stamp with purple, green, and blue pigment ink pads. You can combine inks on one stamp by placing the stamp face up on the table and tapping the colors on. Stamp the image onto the paper. Sprinkle clear embossing powder over the inked areas. Tap off the excess powder and use a heat gun to melt the embossing powder. Tear paper toward you to expose the soft edges. This edge will take the pastel colors darker than the smooth surface. The background can now be toned with soft pastel sticks using tissues, paper towels, or cotton squares. Use Q-tips to apply the pastels to the small areas.
Additions. Additions involve a number of copies of a book done at the same time. The copies may be done on a letterpress printer or use some other method of reproduction. One person may oversee the entire process, or a group of people may be involved.
For a great deal of my life, I have been a letterpress printer. And in that capacity, I produced limited edition, finely printed books at the Museum of New Mexico at the press at the Palace of Governors. The book that I've brought with me today is called The Journal of Jose Salias. This was done in 1998 at the museum. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the format of this book. Now, what I did in this particular piece was include the actual size diary pages, as well as the translation, which you see down the sides here, and the annotation at the bottom of the page. The binding, we wanted to reflect the period itself. This was written 1789 to 1818, and actually only included 8 pages, which is a real reflection on the period. The text is very Spartan-like, but amazing that Jose Salias was literate. Incidentally, the binding was done by a woman named Martha Little. We used materials that would reflect the period. The piece is non-adhesive. It's not done with glue. It is sewn onto vellum that was used predominantly during this period. The paper, and this is a paper cover, is handmade paper made especially for this book by Cave Papers in Minnesota. And it's called a paper case paper. And it's very, very strong. And it closes like an envelope and opens so that one can sort of tuck their private information, such as journals were, inside the binding. This also reflects the kind of journal bindings that were brought into New Mexico during this particular period of time. Notice that the title, The Journal of Jose Salazes, is also stamped on. The paper is handmade in Czechoslovakia, and it's called Moravia. It's a very strong cotton fiber. The paper reflects the period. However, it's very hard on the type, which is made from lead and tin and antimony. So remember, in letterpress printing, you're actually embedding the type in the paper. So this edition consisted of only 65 copies. This is called Joanna, the type, and it's what we know as a slab serif, which is a modern kind of a type. Now, I chose to use Joanna because the calligraphy, as you can see, is very, very strong. It works as an illustration material in itself. To try to harmonize with that calligraphic hand with an old style type would have failed because of the strength of the calligraphy itself. And so what I did was select a type that would distinctly contrast with the handwriting. So that it would say, this is contemporary text about an 18th century piece. Some of the other illustration is the title page illustration, which is one of the rare images we have of Spanish colonial militiamen. And this is a drawing of a Spanish colonial soldier, a very rare drawing of a Spanish colonial soldier that appears on a little prayer book done in the same period of time in the 18th century in Cienega, New Mexico. I'd like to go on and show you one other piece, and that is a paper done for this book. I've also worked many years as a edition paper marbler, so I create papers, decorative papers, to be used in conjunction with bindings by hand binders, small presses, private presses throughout the country. It's housed in a clamshell box, and it's Willard Clark printer and printmaker. And this book was done, I think it was done in 2000. And this is the paper that I created for this particular book. Now, this was produced by 4O Imprints, a publisher, a small press publisher in Texas. I was asked to do the paper, and what we came up with here is colors that reflect the area. And also harmonize with the binding. So you have a sage green in here and a russet color, which often used for material from this area. The whole piece gives this very linear effect that reflects the kind of zigzag design material that happens in Native American cultures here. But it's softened by what we call an antiquing, a kind of a white sprinkling that happens over the surface of this paper. Interestingly enough, I also came across, much later after doing this paper, a book that Willard Clark himself produced a wood engraving for the cover. This is a reproduction of his wood engraving. And interestingly enough, the very same pattern. And if you could see this close up, you could see also a very fine dot pattern that's used in here to also help to soften the very strong graphic that's used in this particular design. So I felt in the end that this was a very appropriate paper to be using on this particular book. In other words, just one more design that can help a book, when you're doing it by hand, communicate something and enhance the text.
Collaborative books. Collaborative books are produced by more than one person. A number of different approaches are possible. A theme or story is conceived. Individuals may have the responsibility of a specific job for the entire book, such as writing, layout, or illustration. Another approach involves passing a blank journal from one person to the next, with each artist contributing to the unfolding story by creating the next chapter. A different pursuit may involve agreeing on a theme, size, shape, and binding structure. Each artist creates then one page or pages for the book. The pages are then assembled and bound. Gallery Zipp is an alternative venue featuring invitational theme shows. The gallery is located in a 250-year-old landmark, which is situated in the Glorieta Pass off I-25 North near Santa Fe. Gallery Zipp was conceived and is owned by artists Bunny Tobias and Charles Greeley. A recurring theme for the last 3 years has been the Book as Art show.
Gallery Zipp is really known for mixed media art. We show paintings, sculpture, works on paper, photography, ceramics, art to wear. We even have turned wood in our current show and blown glass. Pretty much the artists are chosen according to the theme and the type of work that would fit into that particular theme. Book as Art has become one of our most popular and successful shows. This coming May, we are going to celebrate our 4th annual Book as Art. The work is selected by a jurying process unless we're familiar with the artist's work already, and then they are invited to be in the show. The Book Arts group has a newsletter, and they print an announcement. The books are displayed on the wall, on shelves, on sculpture stands, on tabletops, depending upon the nature of the book. Some of them are meant to hang, and some of them are meant to be looked at thoroughly and handled. And we like to display them in a way so that people can do all of the above. People first come into the gallery during our Book as Art show. They are presented with white cotton gloves. This gives them the freedom to touch and look through anything in the exhibit. That way the paper or whatever the material is that the books are made of are not being soiled. And one of the things that I look for when choosing books for the show is how much they differ from what most people's conception of books are. Most people think that books are made of mostly paper and bound by boards. But the books in our show can be made of vinyl. They can be made of rubber, metal. It doesn't necessarily have to be a paper-bound book. There definitely is more of an interactive relationship between the viewer and the work of art. In order to really appreciate a book as art, it should be held in the hand, if possible, looked through, browsed through, read, experienced in a much more physically interactive way. Artist books are usually influenced by the artist's current work, the style of art, the interest that they have in expressing their ideas at the current time. That will flow over into their books, which are an extension of their art. If an artist is involved with collage in their usual artwork or assemblage or printmaking, those interests would carry over into their books. Most artist books are one of a kind. Just as a painting is a one of a kind, it will be expressing a particular idea that they are involved with, the same as a painting or a sculpture or any other art form. If it's interesting, if it's original, form, they have to be aware of color, they have to be aware of the composition and the context, and all the principles and elements of what make up a good work of art should be there. And that's what we're always looking for.
Books allowed mankind to record history, disseminate information, and share emotions. From childhood bedtime stories to dreams and nightmares, waiting to become poems and novels, books provide us comfort in old tales and enable us to travel to unexplored horizons. An artist's book is a creative work of art. Books are interactive. As you turn the pages, feel the textures, and experience the lines, shapes, and colors, you touch the artist's work. By nature, books are an intimate, personal statement in creation. An artist's book empowers the viewer to have private conversation with the artist. Sometimes you just can't put a good book down. And who hasn't taken a good book to bed?